So tonight, we have the very great honor of presenting one of our most distinguished alumni, Thanassis Cambanis, who, as many of you know, graduated from the University of North Carolina in 1996, not so long ago, earning honors and BA in History and Creative Writing. And he was editor of our beloved Daily Tar Heel. Thanassis, since then, has reached other heights beyond just being editor of the DTH, has been the co-bureau chief for the Middle East for the Boston Globe, where he now writes the internationalist column for the Globe. He's been a correspondent for the Atlantic, contributor to the New York Times, Foreign Affairs, the National Interest, and the Huffington Post, and has taught both at Columbia University and a visiting professor of journalism at Princeton University. He is the author of A Privilege to Die Inside Hezbollah, Legions, and Their Endless War Against Israel. And he's working on a new book about Egypt that I'm sure we'll hear a lot about this evening. So it's our great pleasure to welcome back home Thanassis, not just from UNC, but also I believe from Chapel Hill High. There's running alumni in the audience this evening. And tonight he's going to speak on the question of the Arab Spring, and the title is The Arab Uprisings Aren't Over. And we're very proud from the Curriculum of Global Studies to present his talk this evening. So thank you.
Thank you, Andy, for that introduction, and thank you so much for inviting me to come here. It's a double pleasure. One, it's just great to come home, to have a reason to come back to Chapel Hill, and every time I come here, it seems like my mother and all our friends are right here checking to see if I still sound as silly as I did when I was a kid. So it's nice to have an audience, a personal audience, as well as an audience interested in what I've been doing. It's also a great pleasure to have the chance to step back after 3 years, really in the scrum of the Arab uprisings, and try and make sense for myself of where I feel like they're headed. I've been pressed up about this close to the glass of the revolt, especially the one in Egypt, since it began almost 3 years ago. And when I agreed to come here, I said, this is what I want to talk about, and then I said, oh, God, I have to figure out what I think. It's been about a month that I've really made this this question, the sort of bigger historical question of where the revolts are today, the focus of what brain power I have. And before I start actual talk, I just want to apologize as well. I have a cold, so my voice has been misbehaving the last couple of days. I have tools, I have water and tea, and hopefully that'll get us through the talk. But I've had a few hiccups today while trying to talk. So let's hope it holds up. So the Arab uprisings today, I've never called them the Arab Spring, and I never called them the Arab Spring mainly because nobody in the Arab world ever called them the Arab Spring, and partly because the idea of describing them as a seasonal change or as a weather pattern seemed at its most elemental to remove human agency from the equation. So I never used that term, but as soon as the uprisings began and they started being described as the Arab Spring, I said, look, it's just a matter of months before someone starts talking about the Arab winter. And of course, like clockwork, that's become its own cliche. As soon as the promising early moments began to give way inevitably to the messy complications of real politics, and especially in the Arab world of revanchist states fighting back for power that people were trying to grab into their own hands, we immediately heard a lot of, well, what do you expect? The Arab winter is now swallowing up the brief Arab Spring. But it really does look today like a dark time. When I survey the region where I live, and especially the nation's trajectory that's dearest to my heart, and that is Egypt's, it doesn't look good. In Egypt, after 3 authoritarian regimes in a row have been unseated in 3 years, we have a sort of retooled, sexy young new dictator in the making who is killing more people than Mubarak ever did, curtailing freedoms with more alacrity than any of his predecessors, and he's doing so to a great amount of public applause and cheerleading. The Egyptian majority is welcoming the construction of a new Abdel Fattah al-Sisi dictatorship, and there are perhaps even spontaneous, as opposed to orchestrated, public signature campaigns demanding that the guy run for president so that he can fix up the country. This is in the very same place that gave the world a really inspiring iconography of Tahrir Square just 3 years earlier. We have in Bahrain, a country where a Shia majority has been tyrannized for the better part of a century by a Sunni minority monarchy that is governed with the help of oil money, Saudi Arabia, and an alliance with the U.S. Navy, and was faced by another inspiring, nonviolent, peaceful revolt that represented the Shia citizens of that country. And there today, if we even hear a whiff of news about what has become of that rebellion, it's to hear the details of how every single plank, from the most ambitious to the least, of that revolution has been staved off by the regime and replaced by, yet again, a sleeker, more effective authoritarian rule. It feels the same across the region, and my errand here tonight is not to depress you, but which is why I'm beginning with the worst news. But worst of all, we look at the war in Syria, where the rebellion that began in Daraa with kids, literally kids, willing to stand up in public and chastise a regime that has failed to feed its citizens, and were tortured, killed, and dumped on the street in front of their homes as a message to their parents and their neighbors, is now in the grip of a civil war that's killed 100,000 people, and where the most, the darkest prophecies of the regimes, self-fulfilling prophecies of the regimes of the region, have most intensely come to pass. And that has always been, it's either my dictatorship or some really crazy Islamic fundamentalists. That's the choice you face. And that has always been the recipe with which the Arab dictators govern. In Syria, not by accident, but by careful, murderous work by the regime, we are faced with that choice today. And it's not because of what the majority of Syrian citizens want, but because of steady, I would say, evil and effective work by the regime there to wipe out any alternative. And now today we have a rebellion that might have been sparked by a very primal desire for equality, expression of the rule of law, but which today is in the hands of some of the worst, most judgmental Takfiri jihadists who don't want to install anything like a free society in the parts of Syria that they have liberated. So, looking around the region, I find my friends and my sources, the people whose struggle brought me back to the streets, first of Cairo in January 2011, are now all over in exile, in depression, in despair. I talk to people I used to